Welcome again, everybody, to the Retro Monster Truck Review. My name is Josh Rhodes. Just going to jump on here real quick and say that this week is literally one of my favorite shows of all time, Minneapolis, 1988. Thank you all again as well for all the new subscriptions we got to the YouTube page, all those 5-star reviews over there on Apple iTunes, and every follow we get on Spotify. It means a whole lot to us, and it helps push the podcast out there a little farther for more eyes to see and more ears to listen. Minneapolis 88 is special to me because I was 2 years old when this was recorded on a VHS tape for me, and I probably wore this tape out. This tape had Minneapolis 88 on it. It had a random Richmond Monster Truck show on there with a bunch of mud bogging as well, which I believe had Showtime with Brian Shell, Little Barefoot, among others. But this Minneapolis show was the biggest show that was on this VHS tape, and God bless my mother for putting this on and recording it so late at night that she probably had to, just so her son could have something to watch over and over and over again on a VHS. So shout out to all the parents out there that did that for their kids when they were little, and shout out to the parents that still do that on DVRs today. Also, please go out and maybe find your local Red Cross and donate some blood. It's a shortage that's out there during this pandemic, and we need all of it that we can to help ensure we save some lives. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. Minneapolis, 1988, here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special edition of the Retro Monster Truck Review. Why? Because this is one of my favorite shows ever, Matt. Minneapolis, 1988, inside the Minneapolis Metrodome. I had this show, I probably watched this 700 times in the mid-90s when I had it on a VHS tape.
Yeah, we're in Minnesota, getting ready to have some fun.
Eh?
That upper Midwest, they got the distinctive accent for sure.
Oh yeah, and this is the first time we're going to cover a Metrodome show here on the Retro Monster Truck Review. And I got to tell you, the Metrodome, I've been there twice before it was torn down. It's one of my favorite buildings that I ever got to go to. It was just one of those ones that you walked into and you're almost awe-taken when you would just look around and see everything. I got to go to the very top of this place and get a photo taken of myself. It's not a flattering photo by any means, but when you look down at the floor, you can see how high up you are in this place. The Metrodome was one of my favorite places to just walk around in. I remember we walked past the Minnesota Vikings NFL where they do the interviews with the head coaches and stuff. I thought that was just something I never thought I'd ever get to see. And you're walking around here as a fan in a flannel shirt with a monster truck program. You're getting to walk around and see all this stuff. It was a cool little venue. I really enjoyed it. But not a lot of people know. We always call it, it's just known as the Metrodome, but it's actually the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome. That's right, Triple H's Metrodome.
Indeed. It's the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome, opened in 1982 and torn down, just barely, 32 years later. So had an okay life, I suppose. Held its first motorsports event in terms of monster truck type event in November of 1983 with the USA Motor Spectacular. And kind of fittingly, the December 2013, the final Monster Jam was kind of the takeoff of that same event date. So kind of had a little bit of tradition there over the years. So many shows running that Metrodome. I think it's kind of an unsung hero in terms of the hallowed halls of monster trucks. How do you feel about it?
I tend to agree with you 100%. Just like the RCA Dome, this was kind of designed after a little bit, was the RCA Dome. The roofs of those two buildings were very similar to one another. This one, the roof didn't quite survive as long as I thought they probably thought it was going to. Had a major collapse, I believe, in 2010, right before a football game. They had to go in, and I think it was almost an $18 million estimate to fix the roof there. And I think as soon as that happened, that building's time on this earth was numbered.
Oh, for sure. That design was kind of popular there in the early 80s. You had the Silver Dome, which is a little bit older, obviously, that has kind of the inflatable roof setup. BC Carrier Dome. You've got the BC Place in Vancouver and the RCA Dome that were both done here after the Metrodome. I think those are the last two with that kind of inflatable fiberglass roof setup. But imagine the pressure difference. A lot of those places had an airlock when you came in, so there was like multiple sets of doors so that the air pressure wouldn't get out and
Mhm.
let the roof collapse in. So it was a really cool design. I guess it must have been okay to be in there and it didn't affect you. I'm sure there wasn't that much difference in air pressure, but I always found it interesting as somebody who's kind of interested in architecture and the way that things are made and the way things work, of how those places stayed up.
Yeah, and one thing I can tell you, actually being there at the Metrodome, just walking in, you don't notice any difference whatsoever as far as the air pressure. I wondered the same thing because the first building that I got to go into like this was the RCA Dome. Of course, I'm closer to Indianapolis, but when you walk in, you don't really feel anything. I was expecting my ears to pop as soon as I walked in the place, but nope, did not happen. Of course, the Metrodome, though, host of the Minnesota Vikings, as well as for a while the Major League Baseball's Minnesota Twins. In this year that we're talking about right here, the Twins actually won the World Series the year before in '87, 4 games to 3 over the St. Louis Cardinals.
For sure, one of these dual use stadiums. And previous episode here on the Retro Monster Truck Review at Three River Stadium, that was a multi-use venue as well for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Pittsburgh Pirates. So during this time, it was real common for these stadium authorities in these various cities to try to have a multi-use venue. And over time, they kind of figured out that it wasn't necessarily the best solution for the viewer and the spectator. So they ended up splitting a lot of these venues apart when they went away, and you got separate baseball stadium, separate football stadium again. But at least that's how it is in most markets now. But I think that these arenas and these stadiums kind of had their good purpose for a while, and they put on a heck of a lot of good shows for a lot of people.
That they did, and just to give a few stats here on the Metrodome before we get into the monster truck racing, the Metrodome was actually the inspiration, believe it or not, for the Tokyo Dome in Japan. The stadium also hosted the Super Bowl in 1992, the World Series in 1987 and 1991, the MLB All-Star Game in '85, NCAA Division Basketball Final Four in 1992 and 2001, and believe it or not, it hosted the AMA Motocross Championship from 1994 to 2004, 2008, and 2013.
An impressive list for sure. So if it's taken after the Tokyo Dome, or if the Tokyo Dome was based on it, is this the only 5-star tractor pull ever to happen was in the Metrodome?
We should probably ask Dave Meltzer that.
Yeah. So we head into this USHRA show here, and this is, kind of in the, I'm going to call it the Mud and Monster format, only because of the way the TV show's produced. You had the pulling shows, which were done by Bud Sports, and they were kind of produced on their own with Ken Brew, Mike Galloway doing the live to tape kind of recording, which was always very well produced. And then you have the Mud and Monster series kind of, which was done with internally, I believe, with SRO. And you've got this season anyway, Larry Huffman and Margot King as your hosts, and they kind of had that space theme intro with the music. I love the intro myself. What do you think?
Oh, I love the intro. I love the intro music. If I could pull that intro and have a clean version of that without it sounding like a VHS tape from the '80s, if I could pull that, I would have it as a ringtone on my phone because it's just that cool.
It's an earworm for sure. It gets stuck in my head anytime I watch one
Oh,
of
it's
these
stuck in my
shows.
head right now. I've been this whole time. It's been playing in my head.
Very fun, very repetitive. So we go to Larry and Margot here on the floor, and they ran quite a few shows together as an announcing duo.
They were pretty good together. They really did well. I remember this show, they did really well together. There are a couple of things that you kind of roll your eyes at, but as far as those two interacting together, they did a very good job here at this show.
Oh, they're professional broadcasters for sure, and they turn the cheeseball factor up a little bit, but it still keeps it fun and light, and it doesn't get too serious.
That's true. We go into the cut class, they call it mud bogging. This might be one of the only shows, folks, by the way, that we're going to go ahead and cover some mud bogging coverage as well as pulling coverage from these early shows, just because this show means a lot to me. I enjoy this show quite a bit. So it's one of the few that I could stomach everything going into the monster trucks. Kind of funny though, we shut off the cut bogger class here with Bad Habit. So shout out to Joe Sylvester if he's listening. How's it going, buddy? This Bad Habit mud bogger though doesn't do quite as good of a job. It gets through the pit, but it doesn't get through it very well.
Yeah, this is kind of a point in flux for mud racing with the USHRA, where some of the vehicles are starting to get really, really powerful and be able to skim across the top of the mud. But at the same time, they're still kind of relying on that old pit design where they're not expecting trucks to go all the way through necessarily. And there's a really steep exit to the pit here.
Yes,
So
there is. A lot
it
of the
makes
a lot of trucks
things,
you're going to see are almost jumping out of the pit at the end.
yeah, it could get a little dangerous. And by the end of the season, they would kind of standardize things a little bit as I think they realize, hey, these trucks are going faster and faster now. These guys are starting to get serious about it and more competitive. And within the next couple of years, we've got the world record being set. It seemed like almost every week during the camel years. So really, really interesting to see the progression of the mud racing kind of almost right alongside the monster truck racing as things are evolving very quickly.
A few of my favorites here featured on this show are the Blue Mule, driven by Gene Jantz. I got to tell you, it's just a really cool looking vehicle. A lot of airbrushing techniques on there that you wouldn't see necessarily nowadays. Of course, you can't go anywhere without mentioning Mud Patrol and Tom Martin, who at this time is only 23 years old. He's driving a 32 Ford Coupe that's actually painted like his native Indiana police cars would have been from the 1930s, according to Larry Huffman here. We got a 1,200 horsepower Corvette known as Kwik Trip. That was one of the ones that I used to love to see on TV was Kwik Trip and Mike O'Donnell.
Yeah, and a lot of these, if we want to go way back, if we haven't covered this event yet on the Retro Monster Truck Review, but if you watch War of the Monster Trucks, some of these Minnesota boggers, we'll call them, are on that show in the Met Center back in 1986. The Ecstasy truck, obviously a different vehicle, but same driver, same name. The Kwik Trip, the Legend, they're all there at that show back in 1986. Here we are 2 years later now in the Metrodome. This is, I think, only the second USHRA event in the Metrodome because they had run the Met Center prior, and USA was the only one running in the Metrodome at the time. But these Minnesota guys, they knew how to get serious in this mud bogging action. They all went pretty quick, and I love the Blue Mule as well. Even though it sounds like, I don't know, Larry says it's got a big block Chevy. It kind of sounded more like a four-banger to me, but it had the power to get through.
See, another one that popped out at me was Disorderly Conduct. I've always loved that name, by the way. Dave Billingsley is driving this thing right here. It's a fabulous-looking red-bodied vehicle. If you happen to go and watch this event, that is one that's going to stick out to you. However, my absolute personal favorite, you mentioned the name just a minute ago, that's Mike Keeney's Legend. I absolutely loved it. I've always been a fan of those almost plain-looking vehicles, but this thing with the rear fenders saying Legend across the top of them, the white walls and the tires being painted, the chrome-looking rim on there is just a beautiful machine. I loved it. It looked like a sprint car almost with a giant wing on the back as well.
I was going to mention the GT wing they got on top of that thing. It looks like it's out of Grand Theft Auto. He's got just the proportions are ridiculous, but it's a good looking machine. He's got the big tires on here, on the rear anyway, and custom cut. He gets through the pit pretty good. And these guys, like I said, they're all pushing it hard here in Minneapolis in the big stadium for the crowd.
I like that Margot says, too, by the way, he hopes that after this run, he's not a legend in his own mind right before he runs. I will say before we get into the results of the mud bogging, if anybody has any photos of Legend, send them my way. I want to see some up-close, really high-detail photos of this because the video quality that we have here is not the greatest. My VHS copy is pretty good, but I want to see some good quality photos of this bogger as well as any other ones that you have. So send them to Retro Monster Truck Review if you have any good photos of some of these old school mud boggers. But our top 5 is who they list here at the end of this. And not a shock at all to see Tom Martin and Mud Patrol winning at a 2.14, followed very closely by the Kwik Trip machine with a 2.27. Enforcer tying Kwik Trip with a 2.27. And then Steamboat Willie, another really awesome looking vehicle at 2.48. And bringing out the bottom half of the top 5 is the old Legend at 252.
Yeah, pretty tight field, all things considered. We're talking about these cars getting more competitive. We had a few cars I think didn't quite make it through the pit, but the compete level's starting to go up here at USHRA Mud Racing. So we go right from the mud racing into the second part of the show now in the Super Bowl of Motorsports, and that is the drag vehicle pulling contest, I'll call it.
Yeah, it's something completely different that you would never really see on some of those more serious pulling type events. You have guys in here with a lot of exhibition style vehicles. The first one that comes out is Dio Wilson, who's pulling double duty tonight. He's driving a Virginian puller, which is a beautiful looking machine. It's a funny car based machine. And the other interesting thing that I noticed is they aren't going by distance here or doing pull-offs or anything like that. They're actually going by time, the fastest from point A to point B down the track. So you're not going to see the sled come up very much. You're just going to see these vehicles pull down the track as fast as they can.
It shows the spectacle of the U.S. Hot Rod Association at the time, and they were always looking for a new cool gimmick, and they really got behind these drag vehicles doing pulling, showing the power, and they commissioned a lot of these vehicles to be built, and some of them changed hands between different owners as things evolved. But you mentioned the Deal Wilson machine here, the Virginian funny car. Anything Deal Wilson puts his name on is going to be beautiful. You got the chrome rims, the pinstriping on the paint job here looks absolutely beautiful in this first pull here.
I agree. Deal Wilson does a great job here. We see the front end coming up off the ground, front tires all the way up in the air. It runs a 17.19. Up next, though, is a guy by the name of Mike Hoff, and he's driving a vehicle that is called Warlord, 2,000 horsepower top fuel dragster. The Warlord is actually the 1976 NHRA top fuel drag racing champion. I want to believe driven by a man named Randy Tharp. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. I dug a little deeper, found out. Actually, excuse me, if I had looked down my notes, I would have seen his name a little quicker. Richard Tharp is actually the guy that drove it. Currently resides in the NHRA Museum looking exactly like it did in 1976. They say it's going to burn 5 gallons of methanol per run here.
Yeah, they did a really good job of replicating those famous drag vehicles here in pulling form, and obviously a lot more robust built, different rear end, and they got the big Dick CPEC tires on the back. But the cosmetic side of it looks just like the real thing. As Mike Hoff, the owner operator of the Buck out in Eastern PA, one of the only full-time pulling tracks out there in the country. So Mike Hoff definitely knows pulling, and he was getting his piece of the pie with these big payouts from US Hot Rod to go run the Warlord top fuel dragster.
He's got another one here in the fight as well. We'll get to that in just a minute. One thing I like here is a statement, I believe, by Larry Huffman. He says 5 gallons per 100 feet. That is only used as an estimate. Your mileage may vary. 18.61 for the Warlord machine. And then we cut right into it with another one. This is by far my favorite right here. Matt, can you take a guess why this might be my favorite?
I'm going to go with the tiny wing on the back.
No, not at all. We're talking about Mike Hollingsworth and the Whiplash machine. It's a plain-looking dragster, you think, right? A really plain-looking dragster. Well, if you've seen Tampa from this same year, this is the same event that Bigfoot goes out and jumps 70 feet across the cars. There's only one pulling pass shown on TV, and it's this dragster. This thing goes down the track, and you can hear this engine just getting louder and louder and louder. And by the end of it, it's one of the biggest explosions I think you're ever going to see of a motor that does not completely fly apart. This thing's being held together by a different strap. You can see the safety equipment work when this motor blows up on Whiplash right here in that particular event.
Yeah, and Mike Hollingsworth is one of the innovators of this whole funny car dragster phenomenon that was going on at the time. He built the Tennessee Thunder, which I think it was originally a Plymouth Cuda, and then ended up switching to a Plymouth Arrow once more of these funny cars got built. He was one of the first ones to kind of see the marketability of these drag car crossover vehicles.
Well, he was actually the first one. This is actually the first pulling dragster ever made.
Sorry, I was still on mute. I was thinking you were going to keep going. We'll have to edit that.
It's all right. It's actually the first one that was ever made, though. This is, like I said, the first one that's ever made. And usually whenever you hear the first one that's ever made, that's something that sticks out into your head as well, kind of like a Bigfoot truck.
He's the originator, not an imitator, you could say.
Exactly. There you go. Unfortunately, though, I'm talking about that Tampa event. You can't find that clip anymore on YouTube. I searched and searched after I was watching this, and I remembered Whiplash was in this show. I searched and searched trying to find that clip of Whiplash blowing the engine. The only clips you can find at Tampa 88 now are on YouTube, and that is Bigfoot's jump and the monster truck event. You don't ever really see the Whiplash pull, and I think that's a shame. That is one of, and I'm not kidding, if anybody can find it and upload that, that is one of the best illustrations of safety holding a motor together that I've ever seen.
Well, no guarantees. I'll have to dig through the archives, see if Turn of the Century Motorsports can make that happen for you.
There we go. Whiplash is going to run a 16.27 right here, but it's honestly, it's the show. throughout this whole thing. This thing does several wheel stands down the track, and the very last one, it goes almost all the way up and then comes back down nice and slow. You can tell Hollingsworth has been driving these things for a long time and knows exactly what he's doing.
He certainly does. One of the pros in the sport. And then we go back, flipping back and forth between the funny cars and the top fuel dragsters. We've got the next funny car on the line here. Who do we got, Josh?
Flying Farmer, Dan Nearpath behind the wheel. Another fantastic looking machine, gets down the track pretty quickly. Actually, a surprising time of a 12.32. They say that Dan might have a little bit of an advantage here because he's also a sled operator, so he might know how these things work as far as getting down the track. Easily and by far, in a way, blows the rest of the times out of the water.
He's got low ET for sure with a 12.32, multiple seconds ahead of the rest of the field at this point.
Last out, we have a infamous name in drag racing, the 1982 and 83 funny car champion, Chi-Town Hustler. Note, I spent most of last night going crazy trying to find out if this was a different vehicle or if it was the actual Chi-Town Hustler that we saw on the drag strip. According to the old USHRA, a member by the name of Quinn Thomas answered my question. He says that there was an article in Pulling Power that did a comparison between the drag version and pulling version. So this is not the same Chi-Town Hustler that we saw win the 82 and 83 National Funny Car Championship. Because, and the first thing that I noticed with this is it says Dodge Daytona on the window, and we all know Chi-Town Hustler was, of course, a Charger.
I did a little searching myself today, and I think I found a couple pictures where the red Chi-Town Hustler was a Daytona, kind of in the later 80s, kind of like 86, somewhere around there, once NHRA had switched to the Daytona, but I don't think they ran it a whole heck of a lot. But, this was in conjunction with the team at that time. It was certainly sponsored. It was, Austin Coyle, was known as being the chief wrench for that vehicle, no matter who was driving it at the time. And I think, if I remember correctly, that Dan Patrick was the one that ended up with this chassis that he ended up creating the Keystone and the Coors Extra Gold funny car with. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm digging into the memory bank a little bit, but I think that's the chassis he ended up with for his funny car.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, this is just a fantastic looking run right here. He doesn't get the front tires up in the air. He doesn't really necessarily put on a show for the crowd. The show for him is the speed. He goes out, takes an 11.66. He's going to win the competition for the evening. Kind of fitting the Chi-Town Hustler would win, because that's what that name was known for back in the day, whether it was a monster truck, whether it was here with the pulling, or whether it was drag racing.
Big time performance. It would have been nice to have Raymond Beadle's Blue Max out there to go against him, but I guess we'll have to wait for another day.
Another day, another show.
For sure. So we get the ticker here going into the commercial. Monster trucks are coming up next, and we come back with a sponsorship from Dick CPEC.
Yeah, we get Dick CPEC right there. But before we go to commercial, I have to note, as a kid, I found this hilarious, and I still find it funny today. Hot Rockin' 104 Gator doing a little bit of a dance for us right before we go to commercial. I don't know why. I thought that was funny.
Go the gorilla, he is not. I'll say that much.
Very true. Very true. Definitely not go the gorilla. We're reminded this is a round robin competition. These monster trucks are vying for the one monster truck to take on the Virginia Beach Beast later in the evening. Before we get started here, what did you think of this format where they would have 8 monster trucks battle to take one tank on?
It was kind of the status quo of the time, I guess. You've got your monster truck battle, and then the smart guy of the group, Mike Katz and the Virginia Beach Beast, getting the full day's pay to go out there and make one run. I think he's the smart one of the whole operation.
Oh, I agree with you 100% right there. He's the guy that's going to go out. He's going to get one run. He's going to have one abusive pass on his body, and then he's done by the end of the night. The rest of these guys, if they go to the final, they've got 3 runs on their trucks. So good for Mike Katz for having that business strategy. The round 1 starts off with Heartbeat and Barefoot right here. I believe this is Barefoot number 3, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, or any other Barefoot fans out there can correct me. Notice how they immediately misspell both drivers' names, Brent Engelman and Fred Schaefer, with Schaefer spelled differently at the end. Both of these are Fred Schaffer, yes. One thing I noticed, and I had to do a little research to find this out, there's a guy that runs out in the middle of this course, and he's got a flag in his hand. He's obviously the flag man. I found out that's actually Ken Donay, the head tech director for the USHRA. They do say his name later in the episode, but of course I'm like, who is that guy? So I pause it and I search everywhere. I find it, and then 15 minutes later, they show it in the episode. Hey, it's Ken Donet. I was like, well, if I'd have just waited, I'd have found this out, but I
Wait and
didn't.
see here. Yeah, so we've got an interesting, I guess, for the time track. They started doing a lot of these U-turns in 1988 where they kind of run side by side down the pulling track. They make an outward turn away from each other, and things get real tight down there at that end. They turn around the inflatable Budweiser bottle, because you got to have that at a
Of course.
USHRA event, and then you finish up with a jump over, it looks like 6 cars here with the Goodyear banners on them. Goodyear always seemed to sponsor those Minneapolis events. Not sure what the connection was there, but an interesting track, iron wall in the cars, no ramps.
Yeah, you're iron wall in the cars with no ramps here. We'll go ahead and get into the monster truck lineup that we have at this event. We got Brett Engelman in Heartbeat, Fred Schaefer with Barefoot number 3, Jeff Boehner in Hot Stuff, Mike Vaughters in Black Stallion, Don Maples in Samson 1, Bigfoot 4 and Rich Hoosier, Mark Bendler in Kodiak, and of course Deal Wilson and Virginia Giant pulling double duty, and then Mike Katz, the special attraction in Virginia Beach Beast. Round 1 here, Heartbeat and Barefoot. Both of these trucks stand and look very similar to one another. And when they take off down the track, I really love how they cut camera angles right here, and they cut down to the floor, and you can see just how big these trucks are as they're coming down that pulling track.
Yeah, 2 big Chevrolets. You got the Heartbeat, which, freshly rebuilt a few months ago off of the big incident in Pontiac where the whole rear axle comes out.
We Heartbeat fans don't like to talk about that.
Yeah, this is February 27th, 1988 here, this event. So he's a few months removed. The truck's back to 100% and going against the Barefoot. The Barefoot correction line we're going to go to in the comments. I'm thinking it's Barefoot 6 at this point. I think. I'm not 100% sure on these. As we know, the Barefoot lineage is a little difficult to keep up with, but 2 similar looking trucks here, and Schaefer always looking for the big horsepower, but it doesn't quite work out for him according to the announced crew here.
Yeah, it seems like the horsepower goes awry for Fred Schaefer right here. He gets the whole shot. He's first to the corner here by about a truck length, but something you're going to see out of Engelman all night is the fact that he backs that corner up a little bit, and Heartbeat spins around this corner amazingly, but what we don't get is a side view from anything else after this. We see the rest of Heartbeat's run. We see a fantastic close-up of Heartbeat hitting the cars, jumping and landing on them, but we don't see how the actual race ended. We see Heartbeat jump, land on the cars, as I mentioned. Then it cuts to Schaefer going off the cars, so you would almost assume by that cut that Schaefer's won the race. However, that's not the case. They cut back. They show Heartbeat spinning around. He's looking around like, who won? And then you see his fist go up in the air with the number 1 finger in the air. So Heartbeat ends up with the win here, but honestly, I would love to see if there was any home video out there of that race, who actually won, because the way they edited here, it's very, very bad.
It's not a great look because you don't get to see the finish line, and they don't give us any replay at all. So it's unfortunate we don't get to see how close the margin of victory was, but officially on the scorecard, the Heartbeat of America going to round number 2.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm happy for Brett Engelman. He gets a nice win here on TV against Fred Schaefer, but they don't really say that much about it. They say, oh, he beat Heartbeat, or Heartbeat beat Barefoot.
Yeah, and
they don't mention the fact that there's a legend in that other lane.
Right, and they just kind of skip right into the next race, which I don't think was necessarily giving Brett his due. But, I guess you only got so much TV time to work with as we go into the second heat. We've got Jeff Boehner in the Hot Stuff Jeep CJ7, super short wheelbase on that one, against the beautiful Black Stallion with Mike Vaughters all chromed out. That thing looks phenomenal.
Oh, yeah, the Black Stallion, the original Black Stallion, is a phenomenal-looking vehicle, as you said, but it is no match for Hot Stuff right here. Hot Stuff gets down this track so fast that almost you blink, you miss it kind of thing. Boehner's definitely got this thing set up earlier in the season. He, of course, famously defeats Bigfoot in round number 1 inside the Pontiac Silver Dome.
Yeah, and it's part of this same season here on a very similar course. So Boehner's kind of got this setup dialed in right off the bat. I always kind of compare the Hot Stuff Jeep at this point to kind of like a squirrel. It just scoots all around the track no matter where he's at, cuts a tight corner, and Black Stallion's not even in the frame.
Yeah, Black Stallion, they don't even really show him until the very end when he's finally coming across the cars after Hot Stuff's already pulling around to go finish and park. Jeff Boehner, I got to point this out too. This truck is very unique for the time, but on this track, it's probably the favorite, I would assume, to be the winner here. It's a tight, short, 110-inch wheelbase truck. It's going to scoot right around that corner. You obviously assume that this truck's got to be the favorite here.
I mean, he looks like it so far. A super fast run from him here in round number one. And we go from that super fast machine to the next truck we see on our screen is Samson with Don Maples.
Throw an anchor behind that thing and you'll see how slow it is.
It was, mostly built as a show truck, and Don tries to take it racing here at a lot of events, and you could just tell the thing's geared so low. It's got the 90-degree rear ends in it. It's certainly not designed for this kind of competition. Definitely a car crusher, but he doesn't draw the easiest slot in round number one, does he?
No, he does not. He's got Rich Hoosier and Bigfoot right here, probably the biggest mismatch of round number one. One of my favorite all-time monster truck quotes right here comes from Larry Huffman. It's a beautiful paint job. Look at the paint job. Look at the chrome on that thing. It's got more chrome than Sammy Davis Jr.'s driveway. I don't know why, but I might have repeated that quote probably, I don't know, 6,000 times in my lifetime.
It's an interesting illusion for sure, and he's not wrong. I'll give him that. What I found interesting was, when you look at Bigfoot, how just it's so much smaller than Samson sitting there on the track.
Yeah, and they even point that out here. Margot King pops in and says Bigfoot at 10 feet 6 inches looks a lot shorter than the 14-foot Samson, and we get a great camera shot here showing this. Samson towers over Bigfoot number 4.
It's just huge, and 14 feet with the tires on, but I bet he challenged to get under 13.6 even on the hauler to go down the interstate. I'm sure Don probably had to take a detour every now and then.
Oh, yeah, and a whole shot here is going to go to Bigfoot. They hit that corner. Bigfoot goes incredibly wide right here. Honestly, it's so wide that you hear Larry Huffman almost has to correct himself here. He says, look at how far, and then he goes, how much Samson slowed down. And I imagine his one eye's on Bigfoot here and the other eye is on Samson.
Yeah, Hoosier gets lucky that he's up against a truck that was struggling pretty much the whole way down the course because, I mean, when Hoosier makes the turn, he's got to be 40, 50 feet beyond the end of the turn. I mean, he's almost off the end of the pulling track by the time he gets that thing turned around.
Yeah, he finally gets it turned around. And that's going to be something you're going to see all night in that left lane is guys overshooting it. And this is the first instance of it right here. Samson hasn't even left the cars yet, but Bigfoot's stopping for dinner as Bigfoot goes on to win. Bigfoot wins by a country mile. Again, another quote I might have used 7,000 times in my life is winning by a country mile. Bigfoot pulling back to the pits as Samson is finishing right here. Honestly, big mismatch. I think Rich Hoosier pretty well knew he had it won, so he wanted to go out there and just try his hardest on this course and see what he could do. And he found out really quick the limitations of the brakes on Bigfoot 4.
He did, and I got to point out, he spilled the beer, man. That turning pole went over. He kind of blew by it, and it just kind of fell on its side. Maples keeps his beer upright. He's gonna be able to take a big swig at the end of this one, even though he's out of the competition.
That's something you're going to see a lot in this event is that Budweiser pole not getting hit, but just falling over from these trucks. The wind coming off of these trucks, knocking over this inflatable Budweiser pole that they have down there. We move into the next race, and it's almost a similar look between trucks here as we've got a really tall Kodiak and a nice short lower to the ground Virginia Giant here with Deal Wilson. Like we said, Deal pulling double duty tonight after he got out of the Virginian puller. Kodiak towering over him right here, though. And me as a kid, though, watching this, the first thing I hear come out of Margot King's mouth is the fact that Virginia Giant has a NASCAR Series Boss 429 engine inside of it. And me as a kid think, oh my goodness, if he could ever dial that thing in, he's going to go 100 miles an hour.
And he almost does. I mean, you see him leave off the line here, absolutely gone on Mark Bendler and Kodiak. I mean, Deal pulls the biggest hole shot of the night by far, and it's no contest at that point. Halfway down the straightaway, the race is already over.
Yeah, Deal Wilson has an incredible pass right here. And honestly, though, if you look back at some of Deal's runs from the early and late 80s in Virginia Giant, he pushed the flag man just a little bit. If there had been lights out there, there's a couple times Deal Wilson probably red lit. And this looks like it was one of them.
So you'd think that, you say the race is already over, but then you get into the turn, we pan back on the camera, and all of a sudden, Kodiak's right beside the Virginia Giant on the track.
Yeah,
It's a race
cuts
to
a hell
the
of a turn.
cars.
Mark Bendler cuts a hell of a turn right there. He comes back on Virginia Giant, but I still think Deal kind of knows he's got the lead right here, and he doesn't have to push as hard. He's about a truck length behind him whenever they finish right here. But honestly, Deal could have won this thing by several truck lengths if he pushed the truck a little harder.
Yeah, and we go to the close-up shot of Deal here in the truck, and you can see the beautiful metal flake in the Virginia Giant paint. I certainly wish that I could have seen that truck in person back then. I'm sure it was a true showpiece.
Yeah, I wish we could have all seen that truck. I wish it was inside the museum. Nowadays, the Virginia Giant is and will always forever be one of the most beautiful trucks ever created in monster truck racing. And I think part of the reason he backs off right here and he only wins by about a truck length is because he knows who he has next round.
It seems like the Bigfoot and the Virginia Giant are always up against each other on these USHRA shows, and it's because they're two quality competitors. We'll see how that semifinal matchup works out.
Speaking of another quality competitive matchup here, Hot Stuff and Heartbeat. Don't know if you would have picked Heartbeat here in the semifinals. However, that truck is very stout. It did just beat probably one of the best trucks in the country and arguably the number one Chevrolet truck in the country up to this point, and that's Fred Schaefer's Barefoot.
We got Hot Stuff and Heartbeat and the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome. It's a lot of H's.
Say that 5 times fast.
I don't know if I can. That's a lot of H's. So we've got the Heartbeat of America in the left lane now going up against, as you said, the CJ7, which could you imagine if they would have ever built a CJ5 Jeep? The tires would have probably touched each other.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, it's
they actually, it was, I want to say late last year on another podcast, Monster Trucks Outlaws of the West. It's no longer going right now, but my buddy Phil, who's been on this podcast as well, he covered World Finals 9 with me. And his co-host, Vince, actually had Jeff Boehner and Mike Welch on the show. And I asked Jeff, hey, with Hot Stuff back in the day, what did it feel like to beat Bigfoot in the Silver Dome? And he actually goes into a little bit of detail as to what actually happens here in this race. We'll get to it in a second. But one thing that he says is they actually, with the CJ7, they widen this truck. It's about 15 inches wider than it really should be. And I think that's part of the reason with what happens in this race right here. This is the race of the night, though, Matt. Honestly, this is the one that just keeps you on the edge of your seat, and you're wondering who is going to win this race. They are side by side, and as Larry Huffman puts it, handlebar to handlebar, wheel to wheel, going into the turn.
They are. It's really, really close. Engelman kind of hits the brakes early and makes that nice tight turn like he did in round number 1. So Boehner's moving fast as they knock over the inflatable beer bottles inside of the inflatable roof. Hopefully nobody bought an inflatable girlfriend that night. But, we get onto the straightaway here, and Heartbeat and Hot Stuff are still just neck and neck as they head into the cars.
Yeah, and Heartbeat, honestly, Engelman gives up a truck length when he brakes to go into that corner. However, he is able to slow down enough that he gets quite the exit out of that corner. It actually pushes him about the nose of the truck ahead of ahead of Hot Stuff. I knew I'd do that with both these things beginning with H as they come down this straightaway, and neither guy lifts. They hit these cars just about as hard as a monster truck can. They fly across the finish line. Heartbeat wins it by maybe the front bumper, but the landing for Hot Stuff is what we're looking at in the other lane. The truck lands incredibly hard. And if you don't know, when they come back from commercial break before this race, if you look off to the left side as they're coming out of the pits and going to the track, you see a bunch of people standing, probably about 50 or so people standing behind that mud pit. And I'm assuming that's crew guys, mud guys, family members for monster truck drivers, all just kind of standing there to go watch the spectacle that they're about to see. And whenever Hot Stuff jumps and lands and breaks the left front tire off, pretty much breaks the champagne just completely off of this truck, he makes a hard left towards some of those people, and you can see some people start to scatter back there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a different time. Certainly, we don't have people on the floor like that anymore, and they call Heartbeat the winner, but I'm watching on the freeze frame here. Well, Hot Stuff made it to the line first. About a half a tire length lead as they get to the finish line. It's unfortunate that Boehner can't come back in the finals, but he sure put on a show doing what he did. And Brett Engelman, the truck holds together this time for him better. Even though he comes up a little short, they call him the winner, but I think he was just the one that didn't break, and he moves on.
I'm going to disagree with you. I think that Heartbeat was there first. So in the comments, debate down below. Who's right here, me or Matt? Because this is a tight race, folks. This might be one of the monster truck races of the 80s as far as I'm concerned. These guys come out of that corner, and there is no lifting for either of them.
Oh, for sure. They're both going after it. And I'm gonna stand by. You're not gonna use it as the title card, I know, when we post, because it's gonna prove you wrong, but I've got hot stuff ahead by a
Is
wheel.
that a dare?
I triple dog dare you.
Right before we get out of here, though, we see Jeff Maynard looking over the damage. They say, "Where's Big Toe when you need him?" And magically, it's all of a sudden, it's like they had the power of editing or something like that. We go to Bigfoot and Virginia Giant, and hot stuff is nowhere to be found. Like you see him looking at the truck, and then the next thing you see is Bigfoot pulling the line, and there is no hot stuff there.
I like the Big Toe reference myself. He's not even at the show, and Ray Perkowski's getting a shout out.
Exactly. And for years after this, I heard them say the name Big Toe, and I never saw a Big Toe until much, much later in my life. Getting to watch some of these events when YouTube started to come around and people would upload monster truck events onto YouTube. When I finally saw Big Toe, I was like, so that's what they were talking about.
Yeah, I mean they had a little bit of a callback here to some of the other events earlier in the season that they had covered. So we've got two blue Fords now heading up against each other. I like the end zone shot here of the two lined up. I think it's a really cool shot as we get ready to go green. And boy, Deal Wilson's on that light again.
Yeah, he's on the light here on Bigfoot, pulling a bit of a surprise hole shot down this straightaway. Giant easily, like we said, out of the hole first, but that dreaded corner comes up, and both of these guys completely miss each corner. However, Deal misses it a lot worse. Bigfoot kind of spins the rear tires out, but then they come back straight, and Rich Hoosier's on his way to the finals.
Yeah, the rear end on Wilson just comes around a little bit too much, and he just kind of gives up. I think he had a chance to still go ahead and take that one because Hoosier's still having an issue, but he doesn't get it collected up quick enough, and Bigfoot takes the easy win here. We go on to the finals.
Yeah, I'll bring up something here really quick. The first round with Virginia Giant, when it's going around the corner, you kind of see that truck as it's turning, hopping a lot. Here in this corner, as it's taking on Bigfoot, you don't see that hop out of all four of those tires. We're going to come back to that point when we get to the final, after the final round right here, after the tank versus truck thing. But we got a Heartbeat and Bigfoot, right lane to Heartbeat, left lane to Bigfoot. Neither really have a lane to call home as they've each been in different lanes tonight. Honestly, going into the final, Bigfoot really looks like the truck that is at the disadvantage here. Heartbeat has made some very smooth passes, whereas Bigfoot has been all over the place going into this final round.
Heartbeat's definitely been the smoother of the two at this point. So you've got to figure out who's going to win. We've got Hoosier now, who you'd think would have the better turn because he's sitting on the inside. In terms of the way he's turning, can see that Budweiser beer bottle a little easier to turn around. But boy, Engelman's been smooth in both lanes as well. It's going to be an interesting final. And let's not forget, the boogeyman's hiding behind the next door. The Virginia Beach Beast is waiting in the wings.
Yes, he certainly is. Old Mike Katz is back there ready to collect his paycheck. I guess you got to say, though, that Heartbeat's main goal in life for existence, Margot, is to beat Bigfoot. And then they reiterate it again as she says he beat Bigfoot, or he built this truck from the ground up with the sole challenge of beating Bigfoot. Interesting to see they almost throw Brett under the bus right here, as well as saying he has far less experience than Rich Hoosier on the track, even though Brett's one of the original monster truck drivers.
Yeah, you got to kind of take some poetic license there, I guess, if you're the announce team. Bigfoot's been around the longest, but Rich Hoosier sure hasn't been driving in a race environment as long as Brett has. And we see them go down the straightaway here, and it's still a real close race when we get to the corner, Josh.
Yeah, handlebar to handlebar, wheel to wheel again down the straightaway. And again, Engelman backs off, but this time he only goes back by about a half a truck length. So he's pushing it harder into this corner than he probably would have. Bigfoot completely almost does the exact same thing that he did the previous round, except in the other lane, which has a lot more room off to the right side for Bigfoot. He almost does exactly what Deal Wilson did. He almost completely spins the truck out, but in the other lane, it's complete heartbreak for Brett Engelman as the truck just stops after what looked like was going to be a very good corner.
Heartbeat's got no heartbeat coming out of that corner. It just
Red
completely
line.
dies on him, and Bigfoot is completely out of shape, and Rich Hoosier kind of gets lucky again. He's going to end up going to the win on, just kind of a free ride.
Yeah, he gets a free ride right there. It's a shame for Brett Engelman, but the bigger shame to me is the announcing here. I've always hated this, the fact that they say that, oh, Brett's nerves just got to him. The truck died. It died on the exit of the corner. That's not nerves that's causing that issue right there. I'm sorry.
Maybe he bumped the fuel management system or something. Who could say for sure? But regardless, we've got, a Bigfoot win here, and he's going to go up against the Virginia Beach Beast. And I think they go to a segment here in between with Margot talking to Rich Hooser about something. And unfortunately, the YouTube feed I was watching, it kind of
Yeah, it
cuts out. It's
completely
not
cuts out
available.
right there. My VHS has this. I don't have a VCR currently at the house, so I couldn't drag this thing down and watch it to completely fulfill my memory on what happens here. But I do remember them in the cab and Rich showing Margot how the truck goes from first, second, into third gear in the cab, and how it can go from from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive, if I remember correctly. It's a really cool segment. I really like the way that they did it, and they come right back out of it. And as soon as they come out of it, it's tank versus truck, Bigfoot and Virginia Beach Beast.
And it's kind of the marquee matchup here. If
They've been building this matchup the entire evening.
Oh, for sure. Tank versus truck. You've got the M4 chassis on the Virginia Beach Beast, the first tank truck built. Will Towns ends up building two of them, and I think Mike Katz is driving the second one here that he toured a lot of the USHRA shows with. And
yeah,
we
the truck
see
weighs 11 tons, by the way, and they say that when this thing lands, they're going to feel it in Japan, and he's not kidding.
He ain't kidding, because that thing's got no suspension, and it's one of the downfalls of the tank class. They say that this is the wave of the future, but in reality, the tanks would kind of fall by the wayside over the next 2 years a little bit, because they started doing building damage. They were just hard on the drivers. And, you hate to say it's a fad, but when the Camel Point series came out, it kind of pushed the tanks outward, and they didn't have anywhere to run anymore. So it's unfortunate we lost the tanks in that way. But right now, the tank mania is running wild in Minneapolis.
And what you going to do, brother, when they run wild on you? Hoosier, according to the announcers here, they say Hoosier has let it be known he's not real happy about racing one of these tank trucks. He doesn't think it's fair. So they're hyping this tank up like it's God in the other lane compared to the monster truck, rubber tired truck over here. And that's one thing I never could understand, even as a kid watching this later in my life. You almost kind of put your finger on your bottom lip or your chin, and you're like, why are they like downplaying the golden goose in the left lane?
They did a really good job of making Bigfoot sound like a bunch of whiners every time they went up against this tank. I don't know why they presented it that way on TV, but they were always like, oh, Bigfoot doesn't think it's fair. And I think in Pontiac, they said Bigfoot wouldn't race against the tank, so Deal Wilson ended up racing against the tank or something.
Yep, I remember that as well.
I can't remember what the exact situation, but basically they made it sound like, Bigfoot didn't want to go up against the tanks.
They leave the line right here, and Bigfoot gets a hole shot, and Larry Huffman, Bigfoot gets the hole shot. A surprise. Not a surprise at all. There is no surprise in that whatsoever. They come around the corner. Hoosier's taking it a little bit easier than he had the previous 2 rounds. He pretty well knows he's got the win right here. Bigfoot's going to go on to power past the Virginia Beach Beast. Bigfoot wins by yet another country mile on the evening. And then Margot King points out the biggest obvious duh moment of the night. And he goes, you got to remember, Mike Katz's first time out here on the track, where Bigfoot's got this circuit dialed.
And, she makes a good point. It's a duh moment, but it's a valid one.
It's a valid one, yes. But I don't know why. It's just dumb to me. They make an excuse for the tank losing.
Well, part of that marketing, I guess. Bigfoot.
I guess it's just
Bigfoot finally gets a clean run from Hoosier as well, because if he had made a mistake like he had the previous 2 rounds, I think Katz possibly would have had him.
Yeah, if he would have made the mistake that he made in round number 1, Mike Katz wins. If he makes the mistake he made in round number 2, I'm going to still say Bigfoot wins. If he makes the mistake that he had in the final against Heartbeat, then Mike Katz wins. But if he runs the race that he did in the final round against the Virginia Beach Beast, obviously we know the outcome.
For sure. Bigfoot's your winner. Rich Hooser taking the big victory here in Minneapolis, and we see him back up onto the cars here, get out, tilt the hood, and we go to our final commercial break.
One thing here that kind of makes me even still chuckle, and even when I was a kid, I chuckled at this. You hear Larry Huffman say, I want to go back and I want to look at when Bigfoot landed. I want to see, he almost went over on his side. And then when they show the replay, he goes, watch when he lands. Whoa, Margot, he almost goes over. And I'm going to play that, by the way, in this episode. It's not even close. The truck, he lands, he drives. It's not even close to rolling over, and he's trying to make it sound like Bigfoot almost died.
Waving to him. They love Bigfoot here. Let's look back now in slow motion. There's Bigfoot coming up. He's in front of the tank, coming down. Now watch when he lands. Whoa, Margot, he almost goes over.
Yeah, he got maybe 10 degrees off to one side. I mean, it wasn't very far at all. I didn't really understand that commentary either, but, maybe try to manufacture some drama out of the situation since not much else happened in that race. Bigfoot pretty much had it from the turn onwards. So
Yeah, they used the word humiliated the tank at the end of this. But one thing, and this is where I wanted to jump back to earlier when we were talking about cornering in Virginia Giant, and made me wonder why that truck it was doing the bouncing in round one and then completely spins in round two. And you hear Rich Hoosier say, as the driver of Bigfoot, they say he had 3 runs, he actually had 4, but there were different types of driving. First round, he did full-wheel drive. Second round, two-wheel drive. Third round, what did he do? He said a combination of both, four-wheel drive and two-wheel drive. Four-wheel drive down the straightaway into two-wheel drive to get around the corner. One thing that I never really remembered about those trucks back in the day is that they could do that. They could shift from two-wheel and full-wheel drive if they needed to.
Yeah, and this was something that Jason Ronan actually pointed out to me a couple weeks ago. He was watching some footage from the Rca Dome in Houston where Bigfoot loses to Awesome Kong in the finals, and you can see Andy Brass is shifting the thing in and out of four-wheel drive. He goes into two-wheel drive for the corner and then back into four-wheel drive after he comes over the hill after the corner. So that was something I guess the Bigfoot team did a lot, because with the lockers they had in the truck, the truck would chatter real bad and they wouldn't be able to get the steering radius they needed. And boy, that's a heck of a lot of work up there in the cab to be able to move all those levers around. You're shifting on top of moving the thing in and out of four-wheel drive. It's got to be an interesting bit of muscle memory to make that all work out properly.
Yeah, it had to be a lot of muscle memory to make it work, and you could tell that Rich Hoosier was still struggling with trying to make it work. This is obviously before he goes on the 1988 TNT Monster Truck Challenge Tour. So they've got him dialing in right here. If I remember correctly, Rich Hoosier starts to drive for Bigfoot just prior to the 88 season. So he's still this might be his first TV win now that I think of it.
I'm trying to remember. I'm not really sure. He might have taken some wins in Louisville there in Freedom Hall in 87. He might have been driving. But it's one of his earlier wins for sure. And, beginning here 88 as we get ready to go into the points tour here in a couple months for TNT. And the big win, regardless, in Minneapolis goes to Bigfoot, the superstar of the show.
I still love this show, even though I'm very critical of it now. This is my favorite look of Bigfoot ever, period. I loved this look of Bigfoot. It's something I replicated the best of my ability for the Bigfoot open house a couple of years ago in 2019. Rich Hoosier was actually in attendance for that open house. Not sure if he ever saw the truck, but if he did, I hope he recognized it a little bit. It got a little bit of playtime on the Hot Wheels Monster Truck live coverage of the open house, as well as Jason Rona's trucks did as well, except mine were moving, and mine also won that event too. Just Jason's listening. Gotcha. I love this event. I'm doing my best to try to replicate the final right now. I've got a leaf sprung heartbeat truck that I'm working on as well to go alongside this Bigfoot 4 look that it had in that day. Honestly, like I said, probably watched this 700 times when I was a kid. I give it a 6 out of 10. I'm not a giant fan of some of the one-liners that we get, and especially whenever they almost make Bigfoot look like a crybaby, a whiner, like you were talking about earlier, about having to race the Virginia Beach Beast, and then they're calling it's such a surprise when the truck wins. That to me just drowns out the whole thing, because they're making this the great racing bracket that we just went through and we just saw is now all about this one. I don't even know if you can call it a truck. We call it a tank.
Yeah, they kind of build it up that way. And I'm going to go ahead and agree with you, 6 out of 10 on this, just because the event itself, the lineup's okay. It's not completely star-studded top to bottom, and we really miss out on the potential matchup here with Boehner. I think he could have gone a lot further and really given Bigfoot a run for the money here in the finals, possibly even taken the win on the show side of it. But then on the production side, the TV show was never quite as polished as the Bud Sports events were, from an editing standpoint, from the commentary. Even when Brett Kepner gets into the booth there with Shelley Herman, I consider them a better duo, but still not as good as Ken Brew and Mike Galloway are on the Bud Sports coverage. That they just had a chemistry that was, really, really good.
That chemistry was second to none. But Larry Huffman and Margo King do a really good job right here. I thought they bounced well off of each other. But like I said, just I can't get over when they completely drown out the fact that they just had this amazing racing bracket and all they want to talk about is this tank.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that's their moneymaker at that point. People wanted to go see the tank, but we're so many years later now, and we're looking at it through a different eye, I guess, than people did back then. It was the newest thing, so I'm sure people were excited about it. But I'm going to stick with my 6 out of 10. I'm sure you will too.
Yeah.
And that kind of wraps it up here from Minneapolis.
Just really quick before we exit here, I'm not bad mouthing the tanks. I love the tanks. I just didn't get this whole let's just talk and talk this tank up like it was the Daytona 500 champion and all Bigfoot's won is a race down the road in Concord or something like that. It was weird to me and I didn't get it. But anyway, like I said, one of my favorite shows from when I was a kid. I still love to watch it to this day. There's some cool things in this event, and I really hope you all enjoyed listening to it. And I hope you seek it out and you see it on YouTube. There's some good coverage here as far as I'm concerned on this event. So that's going to do it, though, for this week's edition of the Retro Monster Truck Review, and we're going to see you guys again on the tracks across America.
Tanks rule.
No, they don't.